The 9 days of mourning for Pope Francis have come to an end. Now, the eyes of the world are fixed on the Vatican, waiting for the white smoke to rise and a name to be proclaimed beneath the heavens. Deep within the heart of the Holy See, the conclave, the sacred ritual of electing a new pope that has endured for centuries, may already be underway. Candles have been lit, and ballots are beginning to pass from hand to hand. And among dozens of names, one is being whispered more than the rest. Cardinal Luis Tagle. To many he represents a gentler, more approachable church, but to others he is a test. Is the church ready to follow a servant rather than a sovereign? But what if heaven itself has already spoken? We have received a testimony from a Catholic nun who had a near-death experience. In the moment when her soul left her body, she came face to face with Jesus and was shown a prophetic vision of the church's future. But the most astonishing part is this: Jesus mentioned Cardinal Tagle by name, and what was revealed may shake your soul, because not every shepherd is prepared, and not every heart is strong enough to walk into Rome and remain untouched. So what did the Lord reveal about Cardinal Luis Tagle? Stay with us, because this message is urgent. Before we begin, leave your name and the city you're watching from so we can pray for you. Call your name before the Lord and build up our faith together. If this story touches your heart, don't hesitate to support this mission by clicking Super Thanks. God will return to you 100-fold whatever you give. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click that button today. Join us in sharing the love and light of Christ. Now, listen closely to her story. My name is Sister Anna, and what I am about to share with you is neither a dream nor a fabricated story designed to impress or instill fear. I am not a scholar or a mystic. I never imagined my life would hold any significance beyond the small acts of love I offered each day. But when death came to me, sudden, cold, and without warning, it was not the end, it was merely the beginning of something far greater than I had ever imagined. It happened on a Tuesday, an entirely ordinary day. I remember because I had just finished morning prayers and was preparing to help Sister Grace bake bread for the poor. My hands were still covered in flour when the pain struck. A sharp, terrible pain in my chest, like a giant hand squeezing my heart. I staggered, clung to the table, gasping for air. But in just a moment, the world around me faded into silence. I collapsed, and on the cold stone floor, everything sank into darkness. At first, there was no fear, only a strange sense of surrender. I felt myself lifted from my body, weightless, detached from all the pain and burdens I had ever carried. I floated upward into the darkness, not frightening, but quiet, like the stillness that envelops a church when the Blessed Sacrament is exposed. Then the light appeared, a pure, warm light so peaceful that I wept without tears. I was not alone. I was drawn into the presence of a being greater than anything I had ever known, whose love enveloped me more gently than anything I had ever experienced, and that was Jesus. I cannot fully describe him. Words are poor, broken tools in the face of such beauty. His eyes were like two flames, burning with sorrow and joy simultaneously. His hands bore the marks of the nails, yet they reached out to me with such gentleness that all fear vanished. I knew I was completely known, even my smallest weaknesses and hidden sins. But I was loved far beyond anything I could deserve or hope for. I knelt down, or rather my heart bowed before him. He called my name, and it was not just a sound. It was an invitation, a song, a homecoming. Anna, he said, and in that moment I was ready to follow him anywhere. But he did not embrace me into eternal rest, not yet. Instead, he looked at me with deep sorrow and said, "There are things you must see, understand, and speak out." A great sadness passed over his face, like a cloud drifting across a bright field. "My church," he said, and I felt the weight of those two words sink deep into my soul. My bride stands at the threshold of great change. As he spoke, images swirled around us, not as harsh, imposed visions, but like curtains being pulled back from windows, revealing scenes that had been hidden until now. I saw great churches collapsing, not from bombs or earthquakes, but from within. I saw priests and bishops, some standing tall and radiant, others hunched over, broken, weighed down by chains of pride, fear, or compromise. I saw believers, some clinging tightly to the cross with pale knuckles, others drifting into the shadows of doubt and forgetfulness. Then, with a voice so gentle it nearly broke me, Jesus spoke a name, Luis Tagle. My soul trembled, stirred by a deep emotion I couldn't explain. I knew this name, of course, Cardinal Luis, a man often spoken of within the church, beloved for his approachability, compassion, and simple street priest manner. But at that moment, the name was more than just a name. It was a key, a turning point, a milestone on a path I could not yet fully see. Jesus did not say, "He will be Pope." He did not say, "He will lead my church." Instead, he showed me a vision, a road that split in two, one path leading to a field of light, the other into a tangled forest of confusion. And standing at the fork, holding a lantern with a flickering flame, was the figure I knew to be Cardinal Luis. "He has a loving heart," Jesus said, his voice heavy with both hope and warning. "But that heart is being drawn down dangerous roads. He seeks to build bridges with the world, especially with those lost in lifestyles that go against my design, like his excessive empathy toward homosexuals. He believes it to be mercy, but mercy without truth will lead to darkness. Much will be required of him, but I am not pleased with the path he is choosing. It too closely resembles the errors of Francis. I wanted to ask more, to demand clarity. What would happen? Who would he become? But Jesus simply looked at me with that deep, aching love and said, "Pray. Pray for him. Pray for the church. Pray without ceasing." The vision faded, and I trembled with the certainty that the future of the church stood on the edge of a blade, not because of one man, but because of the hearts of all who would follow. Leadership, Jesus showed me, was not about titles or crowns. It was about carrying the cross, washing feet, choosing humility over ambition, truth over popularity, service over power. And I knew with piercing clarity that the days ahead would demand a deeper faith, more fervent prayer, and a steadfast love like the church had not needed for generations. Jesus reached out his hand once more. In that touch, I understood something even deeper. This was not a time for fear, but a time to awaken, a time for the church not to shrink back, but to shine, not to despair, but to trust. "There is still hope," he whispered, and that whisper shook the foundation of my soul. But it must be rekindled anew in every heart. As the light around me began to shift, signaling the end of this glimpse into the eternal, I clung to those words in my soul like a treasure buried deep within. "I will not forget." I would not be silent, not about the warning, not about the hope, not about the fierce, tender love of the Savior who still weeps with his people, still weeps for his church, still calls each of us to be light in the gathering darkness. As the first visions dissolved and the swirling images faded from my mind, I found myself once again standing in the boundless, pure light surrounding Jesus. It was not so much a place as a presence, but it felt more real than any place on earth I had ever known. Every part of me, who I had been, who I was, and who I was meant to become, stood exposed before him. Yet not once did I feel judged in the way the world understands judgment. There was no finger-pointing, no accusing voice, no furious wrath pressing me down. Only love, a love so vast, so overwhelming. It poured into every corner of my soul and left me with no strength but to weep in its embrace. He stood before me, his arms open wide, and from the wounds still visible in the palms of his hands light poured out, brighter than the sun, yet gentler than the moon, filling me, healing me, stripping away the final layers of fear and shame I hadn't even realized I still carried. Every hidden sorrow, every regret, every moment of weakness that had ever weighed me down was laid bare. But instead of condemnation, I was met with a mercy so fierce and tender it nearly broke me. I tried to speak, to apologize, to confess, to explain, but he silenced me with a single look, a look that said, "I know, I've always known, and I have loved you through it all." It was a gaze so pure, so all-knowing, that it stripped away every pretense, every effort, every mistaken belief I had ever built about needing to earn his love. There, in his presence, I understood, far beyond intellect, that there is nothing we can do to make him love us more, and nothing we can do to make him love us less. Then, he stepped closer. I cannot describe to you what it feels like to stand before the King of Kings as he draws near. It is not terror. It is not the kind of fear that makes you want to run away. It is a reverent awe that brings you to your knees, that makes you tremble, not because you are unwanted, but because you are loved beyond all reason. It is the kind of love that bursts your heart open, making you wonder how you ever lived without it. He spoke again, and his voice carried the weight of eternity and the gentleness of a lullaby. "Anna," he said, "you are precious to me, but your time is not yet over. There is still much you must see. There is still much you must bring back." I wanted to protest. I wanted to stay. Every fiber in me cried out to remain in that place, never to be separated from that light, that peace. But I also knew, as surely as I knew the beat of my own heart, that what he was asking was not a burden, but an honor. He reached out and touched me, not my skin, for I no longer had a body as I once knew it, but my very soul. In that touch, I felt a commission, a setting apart. I knew I was being sent like a candle lit from his own flame into the gathering darkness. "You must tell them," he said, and his voice trembled, not with fear, but with the deep sorrow of one who sees what we refuse to see, who feels every wound, every betrayal, every moment of pride and coldness that causes hearts to turn away from him. "Tell them of my love, tell them of my mercy, tell them I am still waiting for them." He showed me his heart, not in a vision, but in the way you feel the warmth of the sun when you step into its light. I saw his heart breaking open, pouring rivers of love and forgiveness across the earth, seeking the wounded, the lost, the proud, the shattered. And I realized his heart never stops pouring out. It never holds back. We are the ones who turn away. We are the ones who hide, who doubt, who stay busy with 1,000 meaningless things, while the heart of God waits with open arms. I saw that every true act of love on earth sends a ripple back to him, like a child's letter finding its way into a father's hands. I saw that every prayer, hesitant, small though it may be, brings his heart more joy than we could ever imagine. I saw that even the most broken sinner who dares to whisper, "Help me," brings him more delight than all the praises of angels. But I also saw the pain of rejection, coldness, and indifference. It was not the fire of anger burning in his heart. It was sorrowful. Sorrow because so many, blinded by pride, shame, or fear, chose to walk away from the very love that could have healed them. "You must tell them," he said again, and that command, wrapped in such gentleness, shattered me once more. Then he gave me glimpses of what was to come. I saw the church, as before, standing at a crossroads. I saw leaders rising, some clothed in light, others weighed down by pride. I saw people longing, desperate for truths, for real love, not empty words. I saw confusion spreading like mist over the hills, but in the midst of it all, I saw pockets of light, small groups of believers, hidden yet powerful, praying, loving, serving, and standing firm. He didn't show me every answer. He didn't reveal every outcome. He didn't name dates, events, or titles. What he gave me was an invitation to hold on to faith, to stay humble, to cling to him when everything else falls apart. He promised that even as the world grows darker, his light will never be extinguished. Though many hearts grow cold, those who remain in him will shine like stars in the night. Then he smiled at me. Oh, that smile! And I knew that even if I were rejected, even if no one believed my story, even if I were mocked or forgotten, it wouldn't matter. I had seen the King. I had been loved by him and sent out with his message. As the light around him grew brighter, drawing me into the next vision he had prepared, I clung to his words again, etching them deep into my heart. Anna, tell them, I am still here, I am still waiting, and my mercy is greater than they dare believe. The light around us seemed to shift, not dim, but change in quality, as if the very air grew heavier with meaning. Jesus turned his gaze toward an open space before us, and as he did, the veil of eternity seemed to part once more. Without a word, he invited me to look, truly look, at what lay ahead for the church I had loved and served all my life. At first, there was beauty. Oh, a beauty so overwhelming it stole my breath and pierced my heart with an ache too deep to bear. I saw places around the world, humble chapels, bustling churches, hidden rooms where faithful souls gathered. In those places, the church shone like a city on a hill. I saw young priests kneeling in prayer, their faces lit with the fire of their calling. I saw nuns with bright eyes, fearless, teaching children, tending the sick, giving of themselves without holding back. I saw families gathered around worn tables, whispering prayers over broken bread, living the sacraments in the quiet corners of the earth. In those moments, the church was alive, not because of wealth, numbers, or splendor, but because of hearts burning with the light of pure faith. The Holy Spirit flowed through them like an unstoppable river of grace, filling their weakness with strength, their simplicity with power. This was not the church of applause or recognition. It was the church of hidden saints, nameless warriors, of prayer and love, lives unnoticed by the world but resounding like a symphony in heaven. But then the vision shifted, and what I saw next brought a sorrow so deep I thought I might break under its weight. In many places, far too many, the light had grown thin, the flame flickering, faint and uncertain. I saw churches abandoned, not because of persecution, but through a slow forgetting. Congregations dwindled, not because they were banned, but because they were no longer wanted. I saw priests speaking not with the boldness of truth, but with the cautious, trembling words of those afraid to offend. I saw bishops burdened not by the cross of Christ, but by the heavy cloaks of worldly ambition and fear of irrelevance. I saw doctrine twisted to fit the fashions of the age. I saw traditions discarded not because they were wrong, but because they were inconvenient. I saw a slow drifting away, so subtle it was barely noticed. Not a mass exodus, not a sudden rebellion, but a quiet, almost invisible departure. Step by step, choice by choice, until faith became a dusty relic on the shelf of memory. No violent storm, no enemy shouting at the gates. Only a gradual cooling, like embers left untended, fading into the silent dark. And outside the walls of these churches, the world grew stranger, louder, faster, harsher. Technology surged ahead, blinding and distracting. Wealth increased for some, while others starved in forgotten corners. Divisions grew deeper, like cracks spreading across the surface of nations and families. Truth became negotiable, love became conditional, forgiveness was seen as weakness. And in that noise, in that sparkling chaos, the quiet voice of the church struggled to be heard. Not because the truth had lost its power, but because fewer and fewer people had ears willing to listen. I turned to Jesus, my heart breaking under the weight of what I had seen. How could the church survive in such a world? How could those scattered little lights stand against the rising tide of indifference and chaos? But he did not look afraid. He did not look defeated. His eyes, though filled with sorrow, burned with unshakable hope. "This is the time of testing," he said, and his voice carried the weight of a bell echoing through the valleys of sleeping souls. Not by fire, not by sword, but by forgetfulness, by comfort, by pride. He showed me faithful souls struggling to keep their lamps burning, men and women clinging to prayer in a world that mocked them, choosing mercy in a world that glorified revenge, offering forgiveness in a world drunk on outrage. They were few, far too few in the vision, but each of them burned with a light so powerful it drove back the darkness around them. And then I understood that the battle ahead was not one of numbers or influence. It was a battle for the heart. Those who remained in prayer, in humility, in love, these would be the pillars upholding the church when the great structures fell. Those who chased the applause of the world, who softened the truth to make it more palatable, would find themselves drifting without an anchor when the storms arrived. Jesus showed me a church not dying but being purified, stripped of worldly ornaments, political power, and cultural prestige, until only the blazing truth of the gospel remained. And that gospel, he showed me, would not fail. It would shine even brighter in the darkness. It would spread, not because it was safe, but because it was real. It would bring salvation, not because it was popular, but because it was the only thing strong enough to hold broken souls together. And he showed me that the next pope, whoever it may be, whether Luis Tagle or someone yet unseen, will face this time of testing. The heart of that man will matter more than policies. Humility will matter more than strategy. A life of prayer will matter more than any conference, plan, or grand vision. If he leads from the heart of Christ, the church will weather the storm. If he leads from fear or pride, the church will suffer. But regardless, the promise remains. The gates of hell shall not prevail. I wept before Jesus, not because the vision left me in despair, but because it filled me with longing, a longing for souls to awaken, to remember, to return to their first source of love. He placed his hand on my heart again, steadying me, strengthening me. "Do not be afraid," he said. "The darkness may grow thicker, but so will the light." And with those burning words alive within me, he drew me deeper into the mystery, into the next part of the journey he had prepared for me to see. The light shifted again, not violently, but like a gentle breeze, carrying me into a new vision. I stood beside Jesus once more, feeling his endless patience, his sorrow and hope, interwoven like strands of gold. He turned his gaze toward the earth, and what I saw filled me with a profound reverence beyond words. I saw Pope Francis, but not as the world often sees him, not as a figure waving from a balcony, not as a name praised or criticized depending on the winds of public opinion. I saw him through the eyes of heaven. I saw him as a shepherd, tired and weathered, stumbling at times, misunderstood at others, but always rising again, driven not by ambition, but by love. He knelt in prayer in a humble room, far from the grandeur of palaces and thrones. His back was bent, not by the weight of office, but by the burden of souls he carried in his heart. His prayers were not polished speeches. They were raw, broken cries for wisdom, for mercy, for grace to lead a church he knew he was unworthy to command. I saw him walking among the poor, not for cameras or reputation, but because he could not help himself, because he recognized Christ in every broken face, in every trembling hand reaching toward him. I saw him weep alone over scandals, over division, over the relentless criticism hurled at the church he loved like a father. I saw him wrestle with decisions no one should ever have to make, decisions without easy answers, praying not for popularity but for faithfulness. Jesus stood beside me, watching these scenes unfold, and his voice was gentle, almost reverent. "This is what it means to lead," he said, "not to rule from a throne, but to carry the cross, not to seek applause, but to seek the lost, not to cling to comfort, but to pour out one's life as an offering for me." I wept at the burdens Pope Francis bore, burdens hidden from the eyes of the world. I wept for every harsh word spoken about him, for every misunderstanding, for every blow he silently endured, knowing his mission was not to defend himself, but to reflect Christ. But Jesus made it clear, Francis is not perfect. I also saw his flaws, not in condemnation, but in the gentle light of truth. He has moments of fear, of doubt, times when the weight of politics and expectations press so heavily that he wavers. But this is what matters most. He never stops returning to the feet of Christ, never stops asking for forgiveness, never stops clinging to grace. And that, Jesus showed me, is the measure of a true shepherd, not innocence, not perfection, but humility. The humility to admit weakness, the humility to depend entirely on God, the humility to love even when that love is misunderstood, mocked, or rejected. Jesus looked at me, and his eyes were now intense with love and holy urgency. "The next shepherd," he said, "must carry this same spirit, or the flock will be scattered." I saw glimpses, flashes of what could come, depending on the heart of the next pope. If he leads with humility, the church will survive the storms ahead, wounded but alive, scarred but radiant, bringing the gospel to the forgotten corners of the world, even now shrouded in darkness. But if he leads with pride, if he seeks human approval over God's will, the church will falter, wounded from within, vulnerable to every wind of false doctrine and division. The future is not fixed. It will be shaped by choices not yet made, by the hidden battles of hearts unseen by cameras, by whispered prayers in secret, by the courage to choose service over status, sacrifice over safety. Jesus showed me that the greatest danger facing the church is not persecution from governments or violence from enemies. The greatest danger is spiritual compromise, the slow erosion of truth, the silent surrender to comfort, the pride that hardens the heart and deafens the ears to the shepherd's gentle voice. And so I understood the urgency of his call. The church does not need leaders hungry for titles. It needs servants willing to kneel. It does not need strategists chasing earthly success. It needs prophets willing to speak truth even at the cost of everything. It does not need rulers draped in silk and gold. It needs wounded healers bearing the scars of love. Jesus showed me the legacy of Pope Francis, not in documents, programs, or grand gestures, but in the millions of unseen acts of mercy he inspired. Priests who chose poverty over prestige because they saw him do it. Bishops who dared to speak out against injustice because he paved the way. Ordinary Catholics who came to realize that holiness was not found only in ritual, but in how they treated the least among them. He showed me that greatness in his kingdom is always hidden. It is the greatness of the grain of wheat that falls to the ground and dies, so that it may bear much fruit. Then Jesus looked deeply into me again, and I felt his sorrow even more sharply. "Tell them," he said, "to pray not for power but for purity, not for influence but for intimacy with me. Pray that the next shepherd knows my heart, or the flock will be scattered and many will lose their way." I nodded, trembling. Never had it been clearer to me that everything depends not on the structure of the church, but on the hearts of those called to lead it. And with that vision burning within my soul, Jesus turned again, raising his hand to draw back the veil even further, to show me deeper things, not only about the leaders, but about every soul who will be called to choose between light and darkness in the days to come. The vision shifted again, and as the light shimmered before us, Jesus raised his hand once more. and I knew he was about to show me something that weighed heavily on his heart. I steadied myself, sensing the depth of what was coming, the weight of it pressing on my soul like a great wave about to break. In the space before us, a figure began to emerge, at first distant and faint, as though heaven itself hesitated to reveal everything at once. But as the mist dissolved, I saw clearly Luis Tagle, the name that had been mentioned earlier in my journey, and now I stood face to face with the deeper mystery surrounding him. He appeared as a man of warmth. His face was open, his smile gentle, and there was a kindness in his eyes that naturally drew people toward him. I felt the love he had for the poor, the sincerity in his desire to serve. There was a tenderness in him, a gift capable of reaching across divides, of speaking to wounded souls in a language they could understand. Jesus stood beside me in silence, letting me feel the weight of what was being revealed instead of rushing to explain it. And gradually I began to perceive what lay beneath the surface. Around Luis Tagle, two paths seemed to entwine like vines, one lush and vibrant, full of life, the other dark and tangled, leading deep into confusion. They were not fixed, not predetermined. They shimmered and shifted, as if his future would be shaped moment by moment, choice by choice. If he chooses the path of humility, a deep, demanding humility, he will become a light for the church unlike anything seen in many years. His love for the poor will reflect the very heart of Christ. His ability to connect will heal many wounds. His leadership, grounded in prayer and truth, could draw lost souls back into the safe fold of the flock. I saw within him the potential to become a beacon, a true shepherd, a voice that speaks not for personal glory, but for the glory of God alone. But if he gives in to pride, if he lets the praise of the world, the temptation of influence, and the comfort of applause seep into his soul, then the path will darken. Slowly, subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, but inevitably. I saw dangers gathering around him, the temptation to compromise the truth in order to be accepted, such as his support for building bridges with the LGBTQ+ community without emphasizing conversion, the pressure to soften the gospel into something more easily swallowed, mirroring Francis's path of compassion that at times stretched beyond the boundaries of truth, the risk of losing sight of the cross amid the glitter of human approval. It would not be a dramatic fall, it would be 1,000 small choices, each one justified by compassion or relevance, yet each one drawing him further from the burning center of Christ's love. And if that happens, great confusion will spread among the faithful, not through violence or blatant heresy, but through the slow erosion of clarity, a blurring between light and darkness, truth and sentiment, grace and mere tolerance. Jesus did not explicitly say that Luis Tagle would become Pope. He did not name him as the next successor. Instead, he made it clear that this would depend on the choices Tagle makes, on the prayers of the Church, and on the readiness of his heart to seek God's will over human calculation. I painfully understood that the future is not predetermined. It is alive in motion, shaped by the interaction between human freedom and divine providence. Heaven is not passively watching. It leans in close, breathing prayers of hope into choices not yet made. I wanted to ask Jesus, what should we do? Should we hope? Should we fear? Should we prepare for glory or brace for disaster? But he simply looked at me, eyes full of sorrow and hope intertwined, and I found I didn't need to ask. The answer was simple: pray. Pray for humility, pray for clarity, pray for the courage to choose Christ when the easier path calls louder. I saw that the fate of the Church does not rest on one person's shoulders. It never has, and it never will. The Church stands or falls not by the skill of its leaders, but by the faithfulness of the saints, known or hidden, tucked away in monasteries, villages, and broken homes across the world. It is the prayers of the faithful, the sacrifices of the unseen, the fierce and quiet love of those who cling to Christ in the dark, that uphold the Church more than any title or throne ever could. yet leadership still matters. The choices of a leader ripple outward, shaping the hearts of millions. A leader's surrender to Christ, or lack of it, can tip the scales for generations. Luis Tagle stood at a crossroads in division, holding a flickering lamp, uncertain. The path he will choose remains hidden, even from me. It is not a matter of fate, but of daily decisions, and I knew that the church must pray for him, not with fear, not with anger, but with the fierce love only Christ can teach. Jesus turned to me again, his face solemn yet radiant. "The future is not yet written," he said, "but the seeds have been sown. Tell them to sow seeds of faith, seeds of prayer, seeds of trust." He opened his hands before me, and from them poured a rain of tiny, glimmering seeds, each one a prayer, a sacrifice, a hidden act of love. And I understood that we are not powerless in the face of what is coming. We are the gardeners in the fields of the kingdom. We are the sowers of hope in barren soil, and if we plant faithfully, even if we never see the harvest, the church will endure. With that final vision burning in my soul, Jesus turned once more, beckoning me deeper into the lessons I was meant to carry back. Lessons not only about popes and power, but about the battle every soul must face, between light and darkness, faith and fear, love and pride. The visions Jesus had shown me so far were powerful, almost too much for my soul to bear. But I sensed something deeper now being revealed. The light around us seemed sharper, more focused, as if cutting through all illusion. Jesus looked at me with an intensity that caused everything else to fade. And with a simple gesture, he opened the next part of the vision. At first, I saw no people, no churches, no cities. Instead, I saw movement. Forces spreading across the earth like invisible tides, colliding in the spaces between decisions, between words, between the silent cries of the heart. These were not armies, not visible forces wielding swords and banners. They were quieter, subtler, yet more powerful than any battle of steel or stone. On one side was humility, gentle, steadfast, persistent, like a river cutting through stone. At first glance it looked weak, no armies, no riches, no worldly power. But wherever it touched, life sprang forth. Families grew stronger, wounds were healed, souls found peace, even in the smallest of acts, a whispered prayer, a quiet forgiveness, a hidden sacrifice. The power of humility created miracles unseen by the world but celebrated in heaven. On the other side stood pride, loud, dazzling, aggressive. It wore many faces, some beautiful, some terrifying, but its core was always the same. Pride fuels division, stirs anger, feeds resentment. Pride turns leaders into tyrants, servants into masters, communities into battlegrounds. It promises greatness, but delivers isolation. It promises freedom, but binds the soul tighter than chains. And in the midst of this invisible battle, the church stood, not as a building, not as an institution measured by wealth or architecture, but as a living body, fragile, beautiful, bruised, radiant. It fights not to survive in the eyes of the world, but to remain faithful in the eyes of God. Jesus showed me that the future of the church would not be decided in boardrooms or conferences. It would not be won or lost through grand declarations or political alliances. No headline would mark the moment of victory or defeat. The real battle would be waged, and is being waged, within the human heart. It would be decided by priests choosing the cross or the spotlight, by bishops choosing the towel and basin of service or the comfort of a throne, by ordinary believers choosing the quiet daily sacrifices or the pursuit of fame, by souls choosing the painful path of repentance and forgiveness or the easier road of pride and blame. I saw countless souls, each standing before two doors, one marked with a golden crown, blinding and heavy. The other was marked with a crown of thorns. The The golden crown promised ease, recognition, and applause. The crown of thorns promised suffering, obscurity, mockery, and eternal life. And I wept as I watched so many choose the golden crown, believing it to be the wiser path, not realizing it led deeper into the darkness. But there were others. Oh, heaven rejoiced over them, those who bowed low, who chose the crown of thorns, who knelt and whispered, "Not my will, but yours." Their names were not shouted in the streets, their actions were not caught on camera, yet their light pierced the darkness like 1,000 stars blazing in the night. And I understood. Wealth and influence will not save the church. Buildings may fall, bank accounts may vanish, political favor may shift like sand, but if the hearts remain faithful, humble, prayerful, clinging to Christ, the church will endure. The church will rise, purer, stronger, more radiant than ever before. Jesus turned to me, his voice gentle but carrying the full authority of eternity. "Tell them," he said, "that they must choose their weapons wisely. Not anger, but prayer. Not division, but unity. Not pride, but love. Only these can stand firm against what is coming." He showed me that pride will grow louder in the days ahead, not only in the world but within the church itself. Disputes will arise, anger will flare, arguments over tradition, progress, and every imaginable issue will fracture communities like shattered glass. But beneath every argument, the real question will be simple. Will you choose yourself, or will you choose me? The true battle will not be between traditionalists and reformers, conservatives and liberals, the old and the young. It will be the ancient battle within every human soul since the Garden of Eden. The choice between trusting God or seizing control by our own strength. And just as pride once tore apart the ranks of angels, it can now tear apart the earthly church, if we allow it. But humility, oh humility, has the power to weave the broken pieces back together. The humility to admit when we are wrong, the humility to listen before speaking, the humility to serve instead of demanding, the humility to forgive even when it costs us everything. In this battle, Jesus showed me that the greatest saints will not necessarily be the loudest, the most educated, or the most influential. They will be the ones who kneel the lowest, love the fiercest, and choose daily, quietly, stubbornly, to believe that Christ is enough. And so I stood there, burning with the awareness that this invisible battle is happening now. Not someday in the distant future, not in faraway halls of power, but in every whispered prayer, every decision made, every heart choosing between surrender or rebellion. I realized that every soul matters. Your choice and mine may tip the scales more than we can understand. And Jesus, looking at me with those eternal eyes, spoke words I will never forget. It begins with you, with each one. Choose the light, choose love, choose me. Then, once again, he beckoned me deeper, into the next lessons he had prepared. Lessons not only about battles and visions, but about the weapons every soul must wield if it wishes to shine in the gathering darkness. The light around us shifted once again, not in blinding bursts, but in something more intimate, more personal, as if the very air leaned in closer to my heart. Jesus turned to me, and I knew that this time it was not a vision of the world or the church. This was for me, for my soul, and for every soul willing to listen. His eyes, infinite in depth and gentleness, met mine, and without a single word, he began to teach me in a way that no sermon, no book, not even a lifetime of study could ever match. He spoke first of faith, but not the kind of faith we often talk about, not just belief in words or tradition, not merely reciting the creed or attending Mass. He spoke of a living faith, a faith that breathes, that aches, that wrestles, and still shines even in the blackest storms. He taught me that true faith is not forged in the easy days, when prayers are quickly answered and joy comes without effort. True faith is forged in silence, when heaven feels distant, when prayers seem to vanish into nothingness, when every voice in the world mocks and doubts, but the soul still clings, trembling but unyielding, to the hem of his garment. He taught me that true faith means trusting without seeing. It means stepping forward when every human sense screams to turn back. It means believing in God's promises even when the evidence all around you seems to say otherwise. He showed me souls wandering through deserts of pain and chaos, clinging to a sliver of hope, and their endurance was precious, immeasurably precious, to the heart of God. Every step of faith, every whispered prayer into what feels like emptiness, every moment of stubborn trust is seen, counted and treasured far beyond what the human mind can grasp. He spoke of loyalty, of a fierce love that remains faithful when the world turns cold. He showed me the loneliness of those who refuse to betray their conscience even when it costs them everything. The students mocked their beliefs. The parents ridiculed for raising their children in the way of Christ. The priest and nuns slandered for standing firm when compromise would be easier. He showed me that loyalty to him in the days ahead will become an increasingly rare and precious jewel. He warned me that many will fall away, not because of persecution by the sword, but because of the slow, suffocating pressure to conform, to stay silent, in the face of the gospel's inconvenient truths for the sake of acceptance. But those who remain faithful, he said, those who choose the narrow road, even when it is steep and lonely, will shine like beacons in a stormy sea. Their witness will pierce the darkness, not through eloquence or power, but through unwavering devotion to a love greater than life itself. He spoke of loyalty not as blind stubbornness, but as the love of a heart that has seen the face of Christ and could never turn away, no matter the cost. Then he spoke of prayer and how easily we misunderstand its true power. Prayer, he said, is not a last resort, not a duty to be checked off, not merely a ritual before meals or meetings. Prayer is the heartbeat of the soul. It is the anchor that holds us steady when storms rise. It is the breath that keeps the soul alive. He showed me that the Church, with all its visible works and missions, lives or dies by the invisible prayers of its children. Prayer is what fuels courage, sustains ministries, and births conversion. Without it, even the best programs and plans will crumble to dust. He urged me, and through me, all who would listen, to build their lives on prayer, not on pride, to measure success not by numbers or applause, but by faithfulness to the secret place seen only by the Father. He showed me saints unknown to the world, hidden souls who changed the course of nations simply by praying in silence, by offering their daily sufferings with love. Their names are not praised on earth, but are sung in heaven with such overwhelming joy it took my breath away. And then he spoke of love. Not love as a fleeting emotion or feeling, but love as a choice, a crucifixion of the self, a daily dying to pride and comfort for the sake of others. He showed me how easy it is to love those who love us, those who agree with us, those who make us feel good. But the love he called me to, the love he calls all of us to, is the love that reaches out to the forgotten, the difficult, the broken, love that forgives before it is asked, love that serves without expecting thanks, love that kneels in the dust beside the sinner and says, "You are still loved." He showed me countless faces. The homeless man passed by on a busy street, the lonely widow waiting for a call that never comes, the prisoner locked away and abandoned even by his own conscience. In each face he whispered, "This is me." And I understood that to love the forgotten is to love Christ himself. To ignore them is to ignore him. There will be no grand announcement, no choir of angels to mark these moments. But heaven will see. Heaven will rejoice over every hidden act of mercy, every cup of cold water given in his name, every moment of love that costs us something. As he taught me, I felt my heart both breaking and healing at once. Breaking for every way I had failed, every time I chose pride or comfort over faith and love. Healing with the assurance that even now, after a life of imperfection, he is calling me deeper. He is offering more. He believes in the power of his grace working through weak vessels like me. He looked at me, and his smile was not one of disappointment, but a gentle invitation. "This is the life I give," he said. "Not a life of ease, but a life of joy. Not a life without the cross, but a life that turns the cross into a crown." And I knew that more than anything else, this was the message I must bring back. This is the treasure buried in the field, the pearl of great price. To trust when I cannot see, to remain faithful when the world mocks. To build a life not on human pride, but on prayer. To love the forgotten as if each one were Christ himself. This is the way of the kingdom. This is the way of eternal life. This is the way home. The visions continued to unfold around me. Each one was more profound. Each one cut closer to the heart of what Jesus was trying to show me. I felt his presence beside me, steady and unchanging, the solid rock amid the sea of shifting images and emotions. But now the focus drew nearer, not to the church as an institution, not to its leaders or titles, but to the soul of the church, the living, invisible current that gives it life and power, regardless of the challenges. He drew me into another scene, quieter than the ones before, yet no less powerful. I saw small groups of people hidden away in humble rooms, kneeling together. There was no grandeur here, no great cathedrals or public displays, only whispered prayers, quiet tears, hands lifted toward heaven with trembling hope. And as I watched, I realized these hidden prayers were weaving something far greater than any human construction. They formed golden threads, invisible to the human eye, but blazing within the spirit. Threads connecting city to city, nation to nation, soul to soul. The lifeblood of the church is not gold, not influence, not even visibility. It is prayer. Prayer is what holds everything together when structures collapse. Prayer is what fuels courage in the face of fear. Prayer is what keeps the lamps burning when the world screams to extinguish them. Jesus turned to me, and though his face remained gentle, there was an intense fire in his gaze. Now he spoke to me not as a servant to a master, not even as a teacher to a student, but as a commander to a soldier about to be sent into battle. He emphasized that in the days to come, prayer would not be an optional extra for the devout. It would be survival. It would be breath. Without it, souls will wither in the dry winds of an increasingly cold and dark world. With it, even the smallest soul can move mountains, unseen by human eyes. Then he showed me forgiveness. I saw deep, bleeding wounds, wounds within families, within communities, within nations. Words hurled like daggers, betrayals carved into the softest places of the heart. Trust shattered into shards so sharp they couldn't be touched without drawing blood. I saw these wounds festering in the dark, twisting souls into bitterness, raising walls so high that even love struggled to find a way through. And then, he showed me what forgiveness looks like. It is not easy, not clean or quick. It is bloody, it is raw. It is the tearing open of the heart to let grace enter where pride had locked the door. Forgiveness is not saying it didn't hurt. It is saying, I will not let this wound define me. I will not let hatred win. I saw that every act of true forgiveness released a power greater than any political movement or human plan. It freed prisoners from the jails they built themselves. It broke the cycle of violence and revenge. It planted seeds of healing that would bear fruit long after the forgiver was gone. Forgiveness, he showed me, is the power of the church. Not wealth, not influence, but the stubborn, staggering choice to love even when love has been betrayed. And then he showed me love, not as the world defines it, fleeting, shallow, conditional, but love that pours itself out without holding back, love that chooses to stay when leaving would be easier, love that kneels to wash the feet of a betrayer, love that hangs on a cross and prays for its executioner. I saw that this kind of love is the only force strong enough to heal the divisions tearing apart the world and the church. Programs will fail, strategies will falter, movements will rise and fall, but love, real, sacrificial, bloody love, will endure. It will prevail. I wept as I saw ordinary people live this love in ways noticed only by heaven. A woman forgiving the drunk driver who killed her son, a priest serving a dying congregation with all his heart though no one thanks him, a teenage girl refusing to mock the outcast at school, a man choosing mercy over vengeance after a lifetime of betrayal. These are the victories that matter. These are the triumphs that build the kingdom. Jesus turned to me once more, his face radiant with fierce, unquenchable hope. "This," he said, "is how my church will survive. Not through the strength the world sees, but through the strength of those who choose to love, to pray, to forgive. These are the weapons the darkness cannot overcome." And I understood, with a clarity deeper than anything I had ever known, that the battles ahead would not be won by shouting louder than the world or retreating into safe corners. They would be won soul by soul, heart by heart, through the quiet, relentless revolution of prayer, forgiveness, and sacrificial love. He impressed these lessons upon my soul like a seal pressed into soft wax, engraving them so that even if everything else faded, I would remember this, that in a world obsessed with power, true victory would come through weakness made strong in Him, that in a world that glorifies revenge, the miracle of forgiveness would shine brighter than 1,000 suns, that in a world tearing itself apart through pride, the humility of love would rebuild what hatred had destroyed. As the vision began to fade, as the light trembled with the signal that my time was drawing short, I clung to these truths with all that I had. They were not just lessons, they were life, they were hope. They were a map, not just for me, but for anyone who would listen, through the storms to come. And I knew, with an unshakable certainty born of standing in the presence of truth himself, that no matter how dark the world becomes, no matter how fierce the storm, three things will remain: prayer, forgiveness, and love. And the greatest of these, now and forever, will be love. The visions began to dissolve, the brilliant light softened, the feeling of being suspended between worlds slowly faded. I felt the pull of the earth again, like a slow tide drawing me back toward a distant shore. Jesus stood before me, his face still radiant with fierce, sorrowful, unstoppable love. He looked at me, not with disappointment that my time with him was ending, but with deep, solemn hope, as if entrusting me with something far greater than I could yet understand. "You must return," he said, and his voice was both command and blessing. "There are hearts that need to be heard. There are prayers that must be spoken. There is love that must be lived, not just talked about." Every fiber of my soul wanted to stay. Every part of me longed to remain in that place where fear and sorrow could not reach, where every breath was worship, where every moment was wrapped in His perfect peace. But I knew, as surely as anything I have ever known, that the truest act of love now was obedience. To carry what I had seen, what I had been given, back into the brokenness of the world, to become, though imperfectly, a small mirror reflecting the light I had been allowed to behold. Before I left, He placed His hand upon my heart, and I felt a fire ignite within me, not a fire that consumes, but a fire that would sustain every breath, every step, every word I speak from this moment on. It was a mission, a holy commission, a glorious weight heavier than anything I could carry on my own, yet light as air in his strength. As the light around me dimmed, I heard his final words engraved deep into the core of my soul. Pray for the future of the church. Prepare hearts, not just structures. Live the gospel, not just preach it. And remember, Anna, if you do not return with the heart of Christ, even the brightest future will be lost. And, with those words echoing within me, I fell back through light and shadow, fell back into a cold, broken world, fell back into pain, into breath, into the trembling, dizzying weight of living once more. I opened my eyes beneath the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, a stark white ceiling. The steady hum of machines echoed around me. I was no longer in heaven. I was lying in a hospital bed. The doctors said I had stopped breathing for several minutes. No heartbeat, no breath. I had died. And then, miraculously, I came back. Clutching a crucifix in my hand, I whispered words no one could understand. At first, I couldn't speak of it to anyone. What I had seen was too sacred to put into words. That beauty could not be brought into the noise of this world. I often wept, not from fear, but from the overwhelming greatness of what I had witnessed, from the burning urgency that consumed my soul. I could not stay silent. I had to tell. I had to warn. I had to awaken those who were still asleep. I tell this story not because I am special. I am no prophet. I am simply an ordinary woman who died, met the King of Mercy, and was sent back with a message that cannot be ignored. Pray for the church, not just for bishops or the Pope, but for the hearts that keep the church alive. Pray for humility to be restored, for fear to be cast out, for true love to rise again. Pray that your heart would cling tightly to Christ when the whole world tries to pull you away from him. We must prepare our hearts, not just our systems. Buildings will fall, programs may fail, plans will change, but a humble, loving heart will always endure. The true church is not built of stone or gold. The church is made of living souls. Each of us is a dwelling place for the Holy Spirit. If your heart is clean, simple, and full of love, you will stand through every storm. Living the gospel matters more than preaching it. We can speak about God all day, but if our lives betray him, our words are empty. Attending Mass is necessary, but not enough if our hearts remain closed. Defending doctrine is necessary, but not enough if we don't live mercy. This world doesn't need more arguments, it needs people who live with the love of God so powerfully that darkness has no choice but to flee. If we do not return to the heart of Christ, then no matter how perfect our plans, everything will be in vain. No strategy can replace love. No conference can substitute for repentance. Everything will collapse if we forget the core: to know God, to love God, and to live for God. Which cardinal do you think will be chosen as the successor? Could it be Cardinal Luis Tagle? What are your thoughts about him? Let us know in the comments. And there is one more thing I want to affirm. This testimony is not shared to spread fear, but to awaken you. Because God does not choose perfect people to carry his message. He chooses the willing. He chooses broken souls who are willing to listen, to feel, and to rise in his light. He is not looking for the wisdom of the world, but for hearts that will humble themselves, for those who dare to speak the truth, even when it costs them everything. If you are hearing this now, perhaps you too are being awakened. The church is not transformed from thrones, but from knees bowed in faith and tears. God is still calling, and what matters most is not who is chosen, but whether you are listening to his voice.